Now, I think part of why this is relevant to the precepts is that the Buddha himself recognized this sort of sexual autonomy that we as human beings have. After all, there is one part of the canon, I think it's also in the Anguttara Nikaya, where he talks about one of the biggest barriers to contemplative practice is these sense desires that just well up out of nowhere, yeah, and just beset the mind with distractions. Now, the meditation that we did a moment ago actually is very helpful. Now, again, we're talking about a male kind of oriented response to things that the Buddha witnessed among the monks. And we just don't know that much about this particular issue with women in the Sangha, or with binary people who also we know existed back then. So the point, though, is that this autonomy that we have around this issue, my sense is that the Buddha was trying to be very thoughtful about right conduct, not so much about wrong conduct, but more about wholesome conduct, because we're trying to create a society and a community where we're easing suffering, not creating it. And so this precept in particular is really around creating a sense of safety and well-being in the Sangha. After all, we are Kalyana Mitras. We are spiritual friends on this path. That's what matters more than all this other stuff. I have been to Dharma centers, Buddhist communities around the country, and witnessed just the complexity when there are no rules around senior teachers engaging in romantic relationships with students. It is ubiquitous. Even if people know better, just by putting people of many genders and identities and preferences all together in a community, there's going to be this kind of stew of passion. And sometimes I think where the issue can come in is when a community doesn't acknowledge the role of power and privilege among the teachers. This is essential. It's saying or thinking that, well, if he or if she came onto you, most often it's a he, right? You must have done something. The amount of what we can call victim blaming is ubiquitous in these communities. And what is at risk here is the fragmentation of the community. So people often are very much likely to say, well, this can't be the case. This must be something that you did. After all, in Vajrayana Buddhism, in the Tantras, which we haven't gotten to yet, there is a spiritual practice around cultivating the energy that we call tantric energy, which is building up the ojas. Ojas is a yogic term for the spirit. It's this vitality, the energy of the kundalini, of the vitality that has at its seed this heart of bliss, and vitality and enlightenment. And there's a relationship between this and cultivating death practices in Tibetan Buddhism, that these two qualities are actually largely one and the same. So this is why, as we move into the tantric practices, the tantras in Buddhism, we start seeing kind of a relying on this the sexual fluids and the passions as sources for the bliss of enlightenment, and cultivating them very skillfully in a very safe, contained space with practitioners who are all way advanced and are signing on basically to doing this. So most Tibetan teachers, including the Dalai Lama, has said this is supposed to be symbolic for most of us. Yeah. So if somebody is going on a retreat with a teacher, and the teacher is saying, "Oh, the time has come for you now to engage in this practice with me," and there are several who have done this, run like hell the other way. If you have not agreed to sign on to be in training to do this, this is very bad. Yeah. So it's supposed to be this sort of symbolic union, though, of the male and the female divine principles. And here we're not talking about gendered bodies, that there are only two options. We're talking about energy principles, ultimately, that are unified. There are a couple of deities, actually. I was looking this up. I have this ancient pamphlet. I have no idea where it came from, but it's been on my bookshelf for probably 20 years. It looks like it was printed on what we used to call a Xerox machine. But these principles of unifying opposites, if you will. One is a Hindu deity called Ardhanarishvara. Combined, this being is a combination. It's, first of all, Ardhanarishvara is a bird, sort of has a bird's head. Kind of similar to a Garuda, what we call Garuda in Tibetan Buddhism. And this being is a combined form of God and goddess in one. So because it's Hindu, Shiva and Gauri, or Parvati, are seen to be unified at their core. And interestingly, and this is why I played the Shiva mantra at the very beginning, one of the myths of Shiva, I don't know if any of you are familiar with sort of this triune of Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, but in some Hindu traditions, you have this sort of tripartite of Brahma, the creator god, Vishnu, the maintainer or the preserver, and then Shiva, the destroyer. And all of them have an important function in the cosmos and in the natural world. Shiva's role as a destroyer, however, is so that new seeds can take root and that the cycle of life can continue to be generated. Now, how does he destroy? Does anybody know? How does Shiva destroy the landscape? He has what's called an Ajna chakra. That is yes, Allegra, right here, this a fire chakra, where he has built up his sexual passion to such a point that it just comes out of his sixth chakra, his third eye, and scorches the environment. Yeah, he's basically destroying everything because of this passion. And so you see the role here of Parvati, the goddess, who is his consort, is there to sort of keep him from getting to this point by not necessarily taming his sexual passions, that's part of it, but it's also to teach him decorum, to teach him that he is still part of the world he's destroying. Yeah. Here we see her in a role of method. That we also see this in Buddhism, that the divine feminine is in the role of method, of making things happen in a practical, in an important way, whereas this sheer kind of power and consciousness being expressed by Purusha or by Shiva in this case really has no direction. So ultimately, Ardhanarishvara really represents that unified balance between these two principles. It's really cool. If you've ever been to India and you see kind of how the Shiva Linga and the Yoni are kind of revered around in different villages, some will prize one over the other. Another being is Chakrasambhara. Chakrasambhara. And I'm reading this part here that says that Chakrasambhara is regarded as a manifestation of the union between wisdom and method, which leads to ultimate bliss. So here again, we have wisdom and method. Actually, I didn't mention that Shiva represents wisdom. I'm not so sure he did. I think he was representing some other kind of power here. But in Buddhism, you often will see um, you'll see these beings or these Dharma protectors, where the male principle is intellect and wisdom, and the female principle is method. And when these two come together, you have a power that um, is really sort of dharmic in nature. There's a term actually. Where is that? Spanda. Spanda is a Sanskrit term that means the original pulsation of divine energy in the cosmos that is fundamentally creative. So spanda is that vibrating principle that remains embedded within each particle of us and of all creation, that vibrates in a way what quantum mechanics has taught us, that everything vibrates. Yeah, it's very interesting. Anyway, the vitality, the creative and generative energy that sustains the world, that continues to bring things into being, is seen to be empowered by this union. And so Tantra is really there to work with anything and everything, including the excesses that the Buddha himself practiced. So the Buddha practiced both everything from extreme austerities, even to the point of getting deathly ill, until he was kind of nursed back to health by Sujata, who gave him rice and milk, and he regained his strength, to the tantric excesses. And his view was, look, neither of these are the way to freedom, but rather what matters here is the middle path. So how do we bring this all back to this precept? And largely it is finding balance and recognizing that the well-being of the person that we are in relationship with, our sense of love includes a deep longing for their well-being. Yeah. Here we start seeing how motivation and intention come back into the Buddhist view. It's really about that. It's really about the motivation rather than any kind of prescriptions or anything. I mean, aside from these four central themes of sexual misconduct, because of how they impact others, because they create suffering. Here, this is all we know. Other than that, the Buddha is quiet. But others have an awful lot to say as we go forward from his time. So, wow, time goes quickly. One last thing I'll say too is about how Buddhism sees the body itself. That, and I don't know if any of you have been holding on to this question, but how often the body is talked about as being filthy and dirty and in constant decay. You know, the second we're born, we're dying. You know, all of these ways of looking at our physical body as really devaluing our physical existence. But that's not really what's happening here. Number one, what these teachings are trying to tell us is don't get too attached to it. Yeah, don't believe in the concepts that we're putting onto them as ultimately pure and ageless. And some of us know this all too well personally. You know, we change as we get older. There are things we're not happy about. When we were in our 20s, it seemed like, okay, yeah, I haven't had that experience. I'm doing good. Maybe you have. Maybe, you know, when some folks are younger, they have to go through illnesses or injuries, of course, right? But the point being, not so much that, but the point in Buddhism is that the body is also a place of transformation. So the physical body has to be maintained. It has to be taken care of. In fact, in the codes, the monastic codes, the Vinaya in Buddhism, the Buddha has all of these prescriptions for various ailments. He was extremely knowledgeable about what herbs to take for what ailment, what oils to use for this and for that. foods, what foods to stay away from if you have this kind of disease. It's really quite remarkable to hear also. We don't hear about this very often, but he truly was, in a way, the great physician, because he had all this knowledge of how to make the body strong and cultivate it so that we can continue to practice on this path and be of benefit. So in a way, the Buddha had a one-track mind, but it wasn't in the gutter. It was about easing suffering and how best to do that. Beyond that, we don't have any idea what he thought about the rest of it. We do have, however, ideas about what commentators since then have talked about, and how bodies, male versus female bodies, are approached by different cultures in place and time. So there is no conclusion, I think. We all have to make our own, we have to come to our own realizations about what is good conduct. And here it's not about being a good person, but it's about cultivating a wholesome state of mind on the path and caring about others in relationships. Because that ego is so slippery. I think this is one of the reasons why so many transgressions happen in communities, is the subtlety of these qualities that take root within the ego, within the functioning of a body, and especially when you have cultivated down to seeing energy in people. They're not just physical bodies, they're not just potentiality, but they're energy, dynamic, life-giving energy, no matter what age they are. And that can be, at a certain level of practice, it can be intoxicating. So you really have to have your ego in the right place at that level so that you really are honoring the dignity of the people that you are serving. Yeah. Beyond that, there are many views. I think one of the places that I think has done a really good job of this is the San Francisco Zen Center, who, when Suzuki Roshi was dying, and he put Richard Baker, who was one of his main students, in charge of the whole community. And much to Richard Baker's own resistance, he told Suzuki Roshi on his deathbed, he said, "I'm not ready." And Suzuki Roshi said, "Yes, you are. You have to do this. You'll be fine." Well, it wasn't fine. He ended up mismanaging money, driving sports cars, wearing flashy clothing, and seducing some of the married women in the community. And it was a huge crisis. Now, how did they survive that? I think they had a very, very strong cohort of senior teachers and a strong board who basically said, you have to leave. This is not the place for you anymore. And then they instituted a process. And if you go onto their website, you can see they actually have, for the last several decades, they've had this sort of testimonial of how we deal with our teachers and with ethical conduct in our community. So they've instituted a process there. There's another community, which I won't name, but it's one I've been to several times, where they say, look, we're not prohibiting senior people from having relationships with students, but they have to come and tell us. I'd say good luck with that. I don't know how that will work. But they're counting on kind of this honor system, or that somebody will say, look, we've decided we want to date, we want to be together. And then it becomes a community matter. But I guess the point is that I think there are creative ways that are more lucid. But when things are under, I hate to use this example, under the blankets, if you will, and they're not transparent, any kind of violation can happen. And that's not just Western teachers. This is, as you pointed out, Allegra, these are people from other places who are in positions of power and authority, and people giving their entire spiritual lives over to these teachers, these masters. It's extremely harmful, to the point where, I've met numerous people whose entire spiritual lives they've just said, I don't practice, I don't believe in anything anymore. They've been obliterated because of that. And so part of my role has been to say, well, some of what you experienced belonged to you in a wholesome way, not what happened. You have to get angry about that, yes, but the progress and the practice belongs to you. The teachings and the teachers are not the same. In fact, the Buddha himself said, don't take your teachers to be all that, quote unquote, but really follow the teachings. Now, that could get problematic in some traditions too, where your teacher is seen to be the equivalent of the Buddha himself. Yeah. And anything they say goes. And so culture is created where the teacher is actually deified in that way. They become an embodiment of divine energy and the Buddha and all of that. And so that can be a setup too. And some people have benefited from a guru like that who's had integrity. But man, that can really sort of shatter a person's own sense of selfhood and power and autonomy. We're kind of looking at what the Buddha would call skillful means. That there is an inherent wisdom and skillfulness in affecting a wholesome outcome that comes with the feminine principle, or the female principle. That there is a wisdom there. There is a wisdom, and it has a power to it. So in some yogic traditions, we would call that Shakti. It carries with it the energy of enlightenment. This is principle. But I think by method, it's what this is doing is it's really naming a particular quality around addressing suffering and addressing skillful means. There are 21 forms of Tara in Tibetan Buddhism, and each one she has her own color to denote a different skillful quality, right? So white Tara is kind of the divine feminine of spiritual guidance, of good merit, and of a strong, healthy body, of longevity. Green Tara is more the refuge, the protector when we're suffering. Blue Tara, interestingly, we never hear about Blue Tara, but Blue Tara is the being of non-duality and healing. Yeah. Black Tara, the principle of sheer power. Yeah, out of fierce compassion. Nothing messes with Black Tara. She is strong and powerful, and any negativity, any negative energy that comes near you, you chant Om Tare Tutare Ture Soha Hum Pe, and bam, everything's gone. Yeah, the negativity is it goes somewhere else. So no one messes with Black Tara. Yellow Tara, much like Lakshmi, the sort of the divine abundance, not just material wealth, but abundance of wisdom, of friends, of love. So we can look at method, if you will, here. And there are also multicolors for male deities too, but it's really often prominent particularly with Tara.